What's up, Whisper Nation? Welcome back to another episode by the Fantasy Whispers. I'm Johnny Game Time. You can find me on Twitter at Johnny_Game Time. We are bringing to you a special clip today of Dalvin Cook versus CMC and who you should be taking with that #1 overall pick. This is a Patreon exclusive from our Patreon. We do every single Friday. It's called Face Off Friday, where we debate 3 different position groups or 3 different sets of players that are going similarly in ADP. We tell you and give you an argument for each player, and then ultimately decide for you who you should choose or what we think that you should choose when you are heading into your drafts between 2 said players. All that on this episode of the Fantasy Whispers. Make sure you hit that like and subscribe on your way in so you get notified whenever we put out new content, which is daily on our channel. So if you want to win your championship, make sure you hit that like and subscribe on the way in. All right, let's get you to that breakdown.
Right here. So, Johnny, our first face-off, as we mentioned, is Christian McCaffrey versus Dalvin Cook. And so we had to do a previously recorded coin flip to figure out which of these guys we're going to get. Let's get over to that video and see what happened.
We're going to his first coin flip is going to be between CMC. CMC is heads. Tails is going to be Dalvin Cook. And this first one will be for Big Travie and the rights to argue which side. So we're going to flip this coin, and whatever comes up, Big Travie will argue for this first segment. So without further ado, let's get that coin flip. Is he going to get CMC or is he going to get Dalvin Cook? Let's find out. And Big Travie gets Dalvin Cook. He is going to be arguing for Dalvin Cook to be taken over CMC. Now let's get to that argument.
Yeah, this one is tough, Johnny. It's gonna be
that's a hype coin flip if I've ever seen one.
I'll just tell you what. I mean, anytime Johnny previously records it, you notice he gets the guys he wants. Exactly.
No, unreal. So, go check the tape. The tape doesn't lie.
You can record it multiple times.
You have access to that file.
No, it's fine. It's fine. We get it. No. All kidding aside, this one is tough because obviously CMC is everybody's unanimous #1. The case I got to make for Cook is simply just how good Dalvin Cook is, bottom line. And I think, you know, we look at CMC, and obviously he is a great prospect as well, and he's done big things for fantasy football. But Cook has been kind of right on his heel, and in some advanced metrics, a lot better than Christian McCaffrey in a lot of ways. If we look at what Dalvin Cook did last year, Johnny, 8 20-plus point games in half-point PPR, 4 games with 2 or more touchdowns. It was the RB2 in PPR, RB3 in standard. We look at him, he's coming off the board as 103 in half-point PPR, so the RB2 right behind Johnny's boy Christian McCaffrey. 100 or more all-purpose yards in 9 games. He had 15 total games in his first 2 seasons. He was being, you know, tagged as injury prone, but he has back-to-back years with 14 or more games in a season. I talked about at the top a little bit of the advanced metrics that I like, you know, these lists that maybe CMC really isn't showing up on, but our guy Dalvin Cook is. Running backs with the most yards created per attempt. Most yards per, running backs with the most yards created per attempt in 2020. Nick Chubb, #1 with 3.15. Henry, #2 with 2.51. You got Dobbins in there with 2.18. But then at #4, Dalvin Cook, 1.85. And in the top 7, I don't see any CMC mentioned in there. Obviously had the injury last year. Don't want to knock him all for that, but he is not in this list of yards created per attempt. So you just look at that advanced metric he owns. Most 100-yard rushing games since 2019. You have Derrick Henry with 16, monster year. But then Nick Chubb tied with our guy Dalvin Cook with 13 games. So since 2019, 13 games for Dalvin Cook with 100 or more yards. I'm just loving what I'm seeing out of Dalvin Cook when he's gotten fully healthy and he's gotten the time to do it. And it's just about talent rising to the top here. Look, I think I trust this offense in Minnesota a little bit more than I trust the Carolina offense. I mean, we know CMC is going to be the focal point, but does that injury last year maybe knock you from getting him fully ramped up all the way to start the year? Is that a knock on how they finish at the end of the year? And we know it's a weekly game. Is that a knock for your team to start strong? You know, some of the similar questions we have with Saquon Barkley, Johnny, are there with Christian McCaffrey as far as coming back from injury and workload. You know, I talked about the offense and trusting the offense a little bit more. I think that's within my right to do as well. Just based on what we've seen. We've got Sam Darnold coming over. That's going to be a little bit scary. We don't know what that means. I just think Dalvin Cook's lined up to have a really monster year. We see that the running back one doesn't always repeat, and I know that CMC was not the running back one last year, but he's definitely a guy that we think is surefire. We don't always nail that right away, you know what I mean, in fantasy. So Dalvin Cook's kind of my bet if you don't want all that exposure to CMC, and I actually think that Dalvin Cook, I'm not going to fault you for taking him 1 overall.
So I'll jump into my Christian McCaffery debate here on this side of the coin. Listen, from a, you know me, game time. I talk about it all the time. I love consistency. I love consistency from my players. I love breaking and looking into players' consistency on a weekly basis because they are, this is a weekly game, Travis. When you look at CMC and what he does and what he brings to the table, you talk about whether or not he can repeat as the number 1 overall. We did bring that up. That was one of our big, topics last year when we were talking about CMC. How he finished 2019 as the RB1. In 2018, he finished as the RB2 by 0.6 PPR points. So he's just behind number 1 in 2018. And then in 2017, which is his rookie year, he was the RB9 in PPR. So pretty solid consistency. Now, I know he did go out last year with the injury, so he came in as RB54. Not what you were expecting as taking the number 1 overall. But when you looked at what CMC was doing in those first, sample games, 1.5 games, we'll say, and then he came back with the ankle injury, so he got a little bit of playing time there. But CMC posted an elite 97% snap rate in week 1, and then he got 64 in that second week, and then he got injured, right? And then he came back, he had 71% of the carries in week 9 when he came back. And then, of course, he re-injured himself, was out basically the rest of the season. In those campaigns, when you look at those games, he had 22 touches and 28 touches, even when he got 64% and 71%. So he's still getting a ton of touches. If you expand that out on a 16-game pace, he'll be good for over 400 total touches. And what do we know? We know volume is king in fantasy football, especially in like a PPR game. PPR league. And I get it. It is the Carolina Panthers. You brought that up. You might not be a believer in Sam Darnold or this offense. But what I will say is that, the offensive coordinator, you talked about the injury as well. I did have some concern with that and where they would bring him back to. But the Panthers offensive coordinator, Joe Brady, has already come out and said that he has not changed his mindset on CMC ahead of the 2021 because of those injuries, which, as we know by now on this show, that sure, coach speak can be coach speak and you can't always 100% read into it. And so, I'm not, take it for what it is. But when you're talking about Christian McCaffery, he's one of the greatest, and this is just behind facts of fantasy football. He's one of the greatest fantasy football players we've ever seen play this game. He just brings so much to the table because he's such a good pass catcher, because he accounts for so much of an offense. Even though he has Sam Darnold should check it off a lot. That's not uncommon. We said the same thing about Cam Newton when CMC came there. He's like, he's not really a check down quarterback, and yet what happened? CMC led the league in checkdowns. So for me, CMC is one of the safest running backs. You talk about highest floors. I think he has the highest floor of any running back that you're going to see. And that's what I would leave my that debate at, Travis, with that. So,
yeah, I mean, look, I like what you said. It's hard to be an anti-CMCer. Like, all the facts are there. I get it. Like, I would not want to pick Dalvin Cook's side of this, but after looking at the numbers and actually looking at CMC, not just the Panthers issue. Look, we like to say you can't say injury prone, and you shouldn't. You should not say injury prone. But I will say this: when I look at a guy like Raheem Mostert, who's an undrafted running back, it kind of makes sense how he is injury prone, right? Like, he is a guy that maybe wasn't built to play in the NFL. People saw that. So we have that. Now, The other side of this is, do I want to say CMC's injury prone? No, but is it any shock that a guy who played bell cow running back at Stanford for all 4 years and then is the bell cow running back for the Carolina Panthers is now getting dinged up as we get closer to his, out of his prime and so some of those things? So no, we know the shelf life short. We know you're dodging injury all the time with running back. You shouldn't account for injury, but you should account for some question marks. And I just think there are some question marks more than people want to admit with CMC. And that's all I'm saying. So even after this, I didn't really want to start with CMC, but even after this, I think I've talked myself into the fact that I'd rather invest in a Dalvin Cook, who seems to be on the other end of his injury bug, where CMC might be just getting into some things that have been lingering up. We'll see what happens with that, though.
Right here.
Oh, you watched the whole video? That's impressive. But if you want to learn how to dominate your draft or win your league, why don't you head on over to thefantasywhispers.com and grab your draft kit today? Or you could click the link in the description below. And if you're still not sold, check out one of these videos.